Hi colleagues, Mike Oakes here. Today I want to talk about some considerations for when you decide to record a flip mini lesson for the writing workshop. This recording is for those of you who already know what platform you want to use to record your lessons, and you're ready for the next step. What could actually go into the content and to the delivery of those mini lessons before you upload them to a digital platform? We're going to think about some of these considerations today, and then I'm going to invite you to try them. When I think about considerations for recording flip lessons, there are three big things that come to mind. One is the materials that we use as teachers for our instruction. Also thinking about pedagogy, specifically thinking about the architecture of the mini lesson. If you're teaching writing workshop, there's a certain way that mini lessons go, and it has to be, I think personally, I believe it has to be revised if we're doing it in a recorded flip mini lesson. And then thinking about what teaching methods sort of fall after that revision of the architecture. And the last thing to consider is time. How long should the flip mini lesson be for students? So if we're thinking about our first item, materials for a flip mini lesson, there are several things to consider there. First being, what are the charts, sort of the tools that we're going to give to students? Now, there are Heinemann digital resources that you could either share on your screen, especially if you're recording on Zoom, or there are charts that you could print, especially if you have a document camera or if you have a phone or an iPad, things of that nature. You could also make your own tools, your DIY tools that you might have. You can see I have tools right here for you made on Post-its with charts. Other things you'll want to consider in terms of materials, and again, when I say materials, I mean teacher materials, your materials, is you're going to want to have a writing notebook. And there's two kinds that I would encourage you to have, both the digital kind and the analog kind. For the digital kind, I am recommending, should say, since most of us are using Google Classroom in some form or another, some sort of writing notebook in a Google Doc where you can see where you start modeling some of your writing. Another kind, obviously, is the traditional kind, the analog kind, where you might have a writing notebook with pen and paper, right? Where you write it down in front of kids, or in front of the recording anyway. Which brings us to our last consideration, is the type of technology you'll want to have. Obviously, if you're recording, you'll have some sort of device like a phone or a tablet or your laptop with a camera on it. I think also it can be nice to have a document camera if you brought yours home from your school, if you were able to, or to look up online to ask, sort of Google, like, how can you turn your phone or an iPad into a document camera? That way you can show some of these things live, right? You can show examples and exemplars you can write live yourself. So those are the sort of the things that I think about when it comes to our materials. The next thing I think about is the pedagogy in terms of the mini lesson architecture and our teaching methods. So if we take a look at the common mini lesson architecture, it looks something like this, right? You have a connection with a teaching point, which often sounds like today or lately we've been learning, today I want to teach you. Then you have your teaching where we're usually either demonstrating or showing an example, and that often sounds like watch me as I do this, or let me show you an example. Then in a traditional mini lesson in our schools, we then move to the active engagement where students usually with a partner in the air. They write in the air. It's your turn to try this out with your partner, and we coach them during that time. And then we send students off with a link and an invitation to practice, saying things like today and every day, and for the rest of your life, do this thing I taught you. And essentially the mini lesson goes like this: I do, we do, you do. However, with a flip mini lesson, there's not really any opportunities for coaching. So I'm recommending that we're taking this portion out because we're not coaching. And you'll see in other people's flip lessons, they'll leave a pause for students to say, okay, I just modeled this for you. Now I want you to try briefly. And then they pause and then they continue. I recommend that we just skip that part and kids could practice after you finish the lesson, and that way the mini lessons won't go too long. So what I'm suggesting is having a teaching, maybe a teaching 1 and a teaching 2. And what happens in this teaching 1 and this teaching 2? Well, my invitation is to make sure we're doing 2 different methods, perhaps. Perhaps in the teaching 1, it's watch me do this, writing live. When I say live, writing on your recording live, either under the document camera on pen and paper or onto a Google Doc. You can watch some of my other mini lessons on YouTube, my YouTube channel, to see how this goes. I've demonstrated how this could work. And then you can show an example. Your examples could be your completed writing. Perhaps you did complete it the night before or just before you recorded it. Or it could be you could post digitally or under a document camera some exemplars of student writing. And this gives kids a vision for what the writing could look like for today. So again, what I'm recommending is having the first teaching perhaps be a demonstration, and the second teaching being perhaps an explanation with an example, right? So demonstration, watch me, and then we say explanation with example. That's the suggestion. And then you can move into your link. Again, for an example of what this could look like, check out some of my other videos on my YouTube channel. And then the last consideration that I might invite us to think about as we're teaching our flip lessons is time. Thinking about how long our flip lessons go. If our average recommended mini lesson is about 10 minutes, then I think we would want to try to at least have that or 3/4 that. Because especially if you're still doing 2 teachings, right? Teaching 1 and teaching 2, that might take some time. So I think if we're aiming for about 5 to 7 minutes in our flip mini lessons, I think that's a good goal. So just to reiterate some of the things that we thought about in considerations for our digital pre-recorded flip mini lessons in the writing workshop, thinking about what materials we use, thinking about our pedagogy, how the architecture of the mini lesson might go, and the methods of instruction, and then thinking about time. I'm sure there are other considerations too, and I invite you to perhaps leave comments on the video to add those. Thank you. Good luck. Have fun.